In a town where everyone knows your name, some secrets are buried deeper than others. When police confronted 17-year-old Elijah Blackwood about the blood on his clothes, they expected excuses, lies, or tears. Instead, with a chilling calmness that sent shivers down their spines, he offered to show them his victims. What the detectives discovered wasn't just a crime scene, it was the tip of an iceberg that would shatter the very foundation of their peaceful community. Sometimes, monsters don't hide in shadows. They stand in plain sight behind badges, collars, and respected positions. The streetlights of Oak Ridge cast long shadows across the pristine suburban lawns as the clock struck midnight. Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, a retired schoolteacher, known for her insomnia and penchant for late-night birdwatching, stood frozen behind her living room curtains. Across the street, she watched as young Elijah Blackwood slipped through his front door, his white tennis shoes leaving crimson footprints on the concrete. His hands and the front of his once blue hoodie were dark with what could only be blood. Within 20 minutes, the quiet neighborhood hummed with the blue and red lights of police cruisers. Detective Vivian Mercer stepped out of her unmarked sedan, the gravel crunching beneath her boots as her partner, Detective Roland Hayes, ended a call with dispatch. The cool autumn air carried whispers from neighbors who had emerged onto their porches drawn by the commotion like moths to flame. "What do we know about the kid?" Mercer asked, her breath visible in the chilly night air. Hayes flipped through his notepad. Elijah Blackwood, 17, honor student at Oak Ridge High. No prior record, not even a detention. Parents divorced last year, dad moved to Seattle. Lives with his mom, who's currently working night shift at Mercy Hospital. Sister went missing about a year ago. Sophia, 15 at the time. Case went cold. The Blackwood house stood modest and unremarkable among its neighbors, distinguished now only by the police tape that began to frame its perimeter. Inside, they found Elijah sitting calmly at the kitchen table, a glass of water untouched before him. His bloodied hoodie was folded neatly on the counter, replaced by a clean gray t-shirt. The smears of dried blood on his hands and face remained unwashed, like war paint, or perhaps a silent confession. "Elijah," Mercer began, pulling out the chair across from him. "I'm Detective Mercer, and this is my partner, Detective Hayes. We'd like to talk about what happened tonight." The teenager's eyes, a startling shade of blue, met hers without wavering. "You want to know about the blood," he stated, rather than asked, his voice steady and unnervingly mature. "That would be a good start," Hayes said, remaining standing, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the kitchen tiles. Elijah's lips curved into what might have been a smile on any other face in any other situation. On his, with specks of blood still visible near his hairline, it sent a chill through Mercer's professional detachment. "They always taught us that actions have consequences," Elijah said softly, "that justice finds everyone eventually. But that's not true, is it, Detective? Some people never face consequences. Some people are above justice." "Elijah," Mercer leaned forward, "whose blood is this? Is someone hurt? We can help if you tell us what happened." "Help?" Elijah's laugh was hollow, echoing in the sterile kitchen. "Like you helped when Sophia disappeared, when we gave you names, theories, evidence." Hayes stepped closer. "Son, whatever happened tonight, making it worse won't bring your sister back." "I never said she was dead," Elijah replied, his eyes flashing. "Everyone assumed that. Everyone gave up." Mercer noticed something then. Beneath the blood and the eerie calm, there was calculation in those eyes. This wasn't a teenager in shock or a kid who'd made a terrible mistake. This was someone executing a plan. "Elijah Blackwood, we need to take you to the station for questioning regarding a potential violent incident," Mercer said formally, standing up. "I'll save us all some time," Elijah responded, standing as well. "I can show you where they are, my victims. I can take you to them right now." As Hayes cuffed him, more for protocol than necessity, Elijah looked back at Mercer with an expression that would haunt her in the nights to come. "You think you know what kind of case this is, Detective," he said quietly as they led him to the car. "But you have no idea what's really happening in Oak Ridge. No idea at all." Dawn painted the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold as the police convoy followed Elijah's directions, winding through the outskirts of Oak Ridge, where palatial homes gave way to forgotten industrial lots. The abandoned Westmore chemical plant loomed ahead, its chain-link fence adorned with faded no trespassing signs that fluttered in the morning breeze like surrendering flags. "This is it," Elijah said from the back seat of Mercer's car, his handcuffed wrists resting calmly on his lap. They're inside Building C, the old laboratory section. Mercer exchanged a glance with Hayes, the same thought passing between them. Were they about to discover a teenage killing spree? The persistent calm in Elijah's demeanor suggested something calculated rather than a crime of passion, which worried Mercer more. Passion could be explained, even understood. Calculation meant premeditation, meant planning, meant a mind that had embraced violence as a solution. SWAT officers secured the perimeter, while Mercer and Hayes led Elijah through the rusted doors of Building C. The air inside hung heavy with decades of chemical residue and recent disturbance. Footprints in the dust, fresh scratches on the floor where something heavy had been dragged. Down there, Elijah nodded toward a stairwell. In the old storage vault, the descent into the basement felt like crossing a threshold into another world. Emergency lights cast harsh shadows across concrete walls covered in graffiti and water stains. The vault door at the end of the corridor stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. "Before we go in," Elijah said, stopping suddenly, "you should know that they're alive." Hayes's hand instinctively moved to his weapon. "Who's alive, Elijah?" "My victims," he replied with that same unsettling half-smile. "All three of them." The vault beyond the door had been transformed into a makeshift holding cell. 3 men lay on hospital-style cots, each secured with medical restraints. An IV drip stood beside each cot, feeding clear liquid into their veins. A camera on a tripod pointed at them, its red recording light blinking steadily. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and maps connected by red string, the kind of evidence board seen in detective movies, meticulously organized and annotated. "What the hell is this?" Hayes whispered. As officers rushed to check on the restrained men, Mercer recognized their faces with increasing shock. Principal Theodore Maxwell of Oak Ridge High School, his round face ashen but intact. Pastor Gabriel Reynolds of First Light Church, sporting a broken nose and split lip. And most disturbing of all, Sheriff Douglas Warren himself, unconscious but breathing steadily despite the bruising around his throat. "I didn't kill them," Elijah stated plainly, watching Mercer's expression change as recognition dawned. "That would have been too easy. They don't deserve easy." "Jesus Christ," Hayes muttered, calling for medical teams on his radio. "The kid kidnapped half the town leadership." Mercer turned to Elijah, professional composure cracking for the first time. "What have you done? These men are pillars of the community." "Are they?" Elijah's voice remained steady as officers began to escort him back upstairs. "Look at the evidence wall, Detective Mercer. Look at the USB drives labeled by date. Watch the videos. Then tell me who the real criminals are." As paramedics rushed in to attend to the 3 men, Mercer approached the evidence wall. What she saw made her stomach turn. Photographs of teenage girls and boys, many looking drugged or frightened. Transcripts of conversations, bank statements showing large cash transfers, and in the center a larger photograph of Elijah's sister, Sophia. "They took her," Elijah called back from the stairwell, "but she wasn't the first, and they made sure she wouldn't be the last. I tried to tell you a year ago, but who would believe a teenager over the sheriff, a pastor, and a principal?" As the first light of day penetrated the basement windows, Mercer realized that the case had just transformed into something far darker than a teenage crime of violence. The blood on Elijah's clothes suddenly seemed like the least disturbing element of the unfolding nightmare. The interrogation room at Oak Ridge Police Department had seen its share of criminals, but never quite like this. Elijah Blackwood sat with perfect posture, his handcuffed wrists resting on the metal table, the fluorescent lights casting hollow shadows beneath his cheekbones. Across from him, Detective Mercer arranged a folder of preliminary photos from the chemical plant, her movements deliberately slow, a technique to build tension. Behind the two-way mirror, Detective Hayes watched with the district attorney, both men unusually silent. "Let's start simple," Mercer said, her voice professionally neutral despite the turmoil of questions in her mind. "How long were those men your captives?" 4 days, Elijah replied without hesitation. "I took Principal Maxwell first, on Thursday night when he was leaving school. Pastor Reynolds followed on Friday after his evening counseling sessions. Sheriff Warren was the most challenging. I had to wait until he was off duty on Saturday." The methodical explanation chilled Mercer more than any emotional outburst would have. "And the blood on your clothes last night, mostly Sheriff Warren's. He was resistant during our final conversation." Mercer slid forward a photo of the evidence wall. "Tell me about this." Something flickered in Elijah's eyes, the first genuine emotion he'd shown. That's 18 months of my life. After Sophia disappeared, you all looked for 2 weeks before the case went cold. I never stopped looking. So this was about revenge for your sister? No. Elijah leaned forward slightly. This was about stopping them before they took someone else's sister, or brother, or child. This was about justice when the system failed. Mercer opened another file. Our team found ledgers, Detective. Hayes is processing them now. You're alleging these 3 men were running some kind of trafficking operation? Not alleging, proving. For the first time, intensity crept into Elijah's voice. 16 kids in the last 3 years. They target the vulnerable ones. Foster kids, runaways, troubled homes. The ones least likely to be missed or believed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Cassandra Mitchell, the county medical examiner who occasionally consulted on difficult cases, stepped in with a tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, Detective, but you need to see this immediately. On the tablet screen, Dr. Mitchell displayed toxicology results from blood samples taken from the 3 men. All 3 have trace amounts of GHB in their system, the same compound found in the systems of 3 teenagers who were found disoriented near the county line last month. The compound signature is identical. Mercer felt the ground shift beneath her professional certainty. She glanced at Elijah, whose expression remained unchanged, as if he'd expected this exact revelation. There's more, Dr. Mitchell continued, swiping to another screen. The restraint marks on Sheriff Warren's wrists match the bruising pattern on the recovered teenagers. It appears the same restraints were used. After Mitchell left, silence filled the room. Elijah's gaze remained steady on Mercer's face. You're wondering if I manufactured evidence, he said finally. I didn't. I simply documented what was already happening and ensured the right people would see it this time. Why not bring this evidence to authorities, to the FBI or state police? A bitter smile crossed Elijah's face. The local sheriff was involved. Pastor Reynolds sits on the State Interfaith Council with connections to the governor's office. Principal Maxwell's brother is a federal judge. Who exactly should I have trusted? Mercer thought of the Blackwood family. A single mother working night shifts, a teenage boy suddenly shouldering an adult burden, a missing sister whose case had indeed been quickly abandoned. The videos on the USB drives, Mercer said carefully. What will we find? Everything, Elijah replied simply. Their meetings, their transactions, them discussing which students to target next, them talking about Sophia and how her spirit made her valuable to a particular client. The door opened again, this time revealing Hayes, his usually composed face flushed with barely contained anger. We need to talk, he said to Mercer, pointedly avoiding looking at Elijah. Now. In the hallway, Hayes handed her a tablet. The tech team started reviewing the video files. This one's from 3 months ago. The video showed all 3 men in Pastor Reynolds' church office, discussing what they euphemistically called their community outreach program. Sheriff Warren explicitly mentioned using his position to ensure any reports about certain teenagers would be buried. Principal Maxwell reviewed a list of potential candidates from the student body, focusing on those without strong family connections. Jesus, Mercer whispered. There's worse, Hayes said grimly. Much worse. And the kid documented all of it. Back in the interrogation room, Elijah watched as Mercer returned, her professional mask slipping for the first time. Even if everything you've shown us is true, she said carefully, taking justice into your own hands is still a crime. I know, Elijah replied with the same unnerving calm, but so is watching monsters prey on the innocent when you have the power to stop them. The evidence room of the Oak Ridge Police Department buzzed with unprecedented activity. Detective Hayes methodically catalogued each item recovered from the chemical plant, ledgers with coded entries dating back 3 years, burner phones containing text conversations about merchandise, deliveries, and dozens of USB drives meticulously labeled and organized. The scale of documentation was staggering, presenting a portrait not of teenage vigilantism gone awry, but of a minor who had conducted an investigation more thorough than most professional law enforcement operations. He kept better records than we do, muttered Officer Jenkins, helping Hayes process the evidence. The timestamps, the cross-references, it's like reading a dissertation on their operation. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Mercer sat in Sheriff Warren's office, the morning sun casting long shadows across the man's commendations and photographs with state officials. With Warren hospitalized, and the case growing more complex by the hour, the state police had granted her temporary authority to access all county records. What she found made her blood run cold. Missing persons reports filed by concerned teachers about troubled students had been systematically buried or reclassified. Traffic stops involving certain vehicles near the county line had been erased from official logs but remained in digital backups. Most damning of all, substantial cash deposits appeared in an offshore account linked to Warren just days after each disappearance. Mercer's phone rang. Assistant District Attorney Caroline Reeves, her voice tense. "We have a situation, Detective. Judge Maxwell is demanding his brother's immediate release and threatening obstruction charges against anyone who continues this harassment campaign against respected community figures." "Judge Maxwell needs to recuse himself," Mercer replied, her patience wearing thin. "We have video evidence implicating his brother in human trafficking. The judge is claiming the videos are deepfakes created by a disturbed teenager with a vendetta. The mayor's office is getting calls from church members defending Pastor Reynolds. This is becoming a political powder keg." After ending the call, Mercer sat back in Sheriff Warren's chair, the weight of small-town power dynamics pressing down on her. The photograph on Warren's desk showed him at a charity golf tournament with Principal Maxwell, Pastor Reynolds, and other community leaders. All smiles and handshakes in the sunshine, their public faces immaculate. Her phone buzzed with a text from Hayes. "Found something. Meet at First Light Church ASAP." The church stood empty when Mercer arrived, its stained glass or windows casting colorful patterns across the pews. Hayes waited in Pastor Reynolds' office, a false wall panel removed to reveal a hidden safe. "Church maintenance worker came forward after hearing about Reynolds' arrest," Hayes explained, pulling on latex gloves. "Said he accidentally discovered this while fixing a water leak last year but was paid to keep quiet." Inside the safe, they found what appeared to be client lists with coded preferences, financial records disguised as church donation documents, and a set of keys labeled with storage unit numbers. "This matches information from Elijah's evidence wall," Hayes said, comparing notes on his tablet. "The kid wasn't making this up, Viv. These three have been running this operation for years, using their positions to identify vulnerable targets and silence any concerns. The storage units already dispatched a team. Initial reports indicate they were used as temporary holding locations before transport." Back at the station, the technical team had recovered deleted security footage from Oak Ridge High School, showing Principal Maxwell leading disoriented students through a rarely used service corridor after hours. As the evidence mounted, Mercer returned to the interrogation room where Elijah remained, now 20 hours into his detention. Though visibly tired, his resolve hadn't wavered. "The storage units," Mercer began without preamble. "How did you find them?" "Followed Maxwell one night after he took a sophomore named Jamie Hutchins out of detention. Jamie reappeared 3 days later, with no memory of where he'd been. I placed a tracker on Maxwell's car after that." "And the offshore accounts?" "Sheriff Warren isn't as good with computers as he thinks. His password was his badge number followed by his wife's birthday." A hint of something like pride flickered across Elijah's face. "Once I had access, the money trail was obvious." Mercer placed her tablet on the table, showing Elijah a photograph recovered from Pastor Reynolds' hidden safe. "We found this. Do you recognize the location?" The image showed a remote hunting cabin beside a lake. For the first time, Elijah's composure cracked. His eyes widened, his breathing quickened. "That's where they took her," he whispered. "That's where Sophia was last seen before they moved her. There's another girl there now. I heard them talking about her on the recordings from last week. Madison Reyes, 14, reported as a runaway last Thursday. How do you know she's still there?" "Their transport contact only comes every 2 weeks. The next pickup isn't scheduled until tomorrow night." Mercer stood, determination replacing exhaustion. "If you're manipulating this investigation—" "I'm not," Elijah interrupted, an urgency breaking through his calm facade. "Madison doesn't have much time, and if she's there—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Mercer understood the implication. If Madison was at the cabin, it might lead them to Sophia and the others who had disappeared. As she left the room, Mercer noticed something she had overlooked before: a small tattoo on Elijah's wrist, partially hidden by the handcuffs. It matched a symbol they'd found in the ledgers, one that had appeared beside Sophia's name. The case was no longer about a teenager who had taken justice into his own hands. It was about breaking open a web of corruption that had ensnared the most vulnerable members of their community, and the possibility that some of the victims might still be saved. The afternoon sun hung low over the pine forests surrounding Lake Westwood as 3 unmarked police vehicles approached the hunting cabin. The tactical team had taken positions in the surrounding woods, their reports coming through Detective Mercer's earpiece in terse, professional bursts. Detective Hayes remained at the station, coordinating with state police and ensuring their operation wouldn't be compromised by any remaining allies of Sheriff Warren. Heat signatures confirmed 2 individuals inside, came the tactical leader's voice. 1 adult, 1 smaller figure. Movement in the back room. Mercer thought of Elijah, now 30 hours into his detention. His final words before they left playing in her mind. If Madison is there, she'll be drugged. They keep them compliant until transport. The cabin looked deceptively picturesque. A wooden structure with a wrap-around porch, smoke curling from the chimney, a boat tied at a small dock. It could have been a vacation postcard, if not for the knowledge of what potentially occurred inside its walls. All units in position, the tactical leader confirmed. On your mark, detective. Mercer took a deep breath. Execute. What followed unfolded with practiced precision. Tactical officers breached the cabin from multiple entry points simultaneously, their movements choreographed to minimize risk. Inside, they found exactly what Elijah had predicted. A man identified as Victor Krause, a groundskeeper from First Light Church, was apprehended in the main room. In a locked bedroom, officers found 14-year-old Madison Reyes, sedated but alive, her belongings packed in a duffel bag labeled only with a tracking number. As paramedics attended to Madison, Mercer explored the cabin, each discovery confirming another piece of Elijah's testimony. A laptop contained logistics for special deliveries to destinations across state lines. A cabinet full of pharmaceuticals matched those found in the systems of previously recovered teenagers. Most damning of all, a hidden panel in the bedroom floor revealed a cache of passports with different names, but photos of missing teenagers, including Sophia Blackwood. When Mercer called the station, Hayes answered on the first ring. "We got Madison," she reported. "She's alive. Evidence suggests others have been moved. Through here recently." "You need to get back here," Hayes replied, his voice tight. Principal Maxwell broke. "After seeing the evidence we recovered from the church and cabin, he's offered a full confession in exchange for considerations." "What kind of considerations?" "Protection. He says there are people above them in the organization, people with the resources to make him disappear before he can testify." 2 hours later, Mercer sat across from Theodore Maxwell in a hospital. Room converted into a secure interview space, a state prosecutor and Hayes flanking her. Maxwell's round face had lost its authoritative confidence, his eyes darting nervously to the door as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. "I want immunity," Maxwell began, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's not on the table," the prosecutor replied flatly. "But cooperation will be considered during sentencing recommendations." Maxwell's hands trembled as he reached for the water glass beside his bed. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about Oak Ridge." "Then help us understand," Mercer said, leaning forward, starting with Sophia Blackwood. Something like shame flickered across Maxwell's face. "She wasn't supposed to be taken. She wasn't on any list. Reynolds became fixated on her after she came to him for counseling, said she had a pureness of spirit that would fetch a premium. Where is she now?" "I don't know for certain. The organization moves them through different locations, but—" he hesitated, glancing again at the door. "There's a processing center near the state line, an old summer camp called Whispering Pines. That's where they evaluate and prepare them for placement." "Placement?" The prosecutor's voice sharpened. "With buyers, wealthy individuals, mostly overseas. Some want domestic help, others, other purposes." Maxwell couldn't meet their eyes. "Warren handled the documentation. Reynolds groomed the candidates. I identified potential targets through the school system. We were just the acquisition phase." Mercer thought of Elijah's evidence wall, the meticulous connections he had drawn between seemingly unrelated events. How did a 17-year-old boy figure all this out when law enforcement couldn't? A bitter laugh escaped Maxwell. "He shouldn't have. We had every base covered. The sheriff controlled local investigations, Reynolds's church connections. Provided political cover, my position gave access to vulnerable students. But the kid," he shook his head in reluctant admiration, "he was relentless. After his sister disappeared, he transformed, started watching everything. Every one. Planted listening devices, hacked emails. For months we thought we were being investigated by the FBI, not a high school student. As Maxwell's confession continued, detailing an operation that spanned 5 counties and involved dozens of missing teenagers, Mercer's phone buzzed with an urgent message from the station. Footage recovered from Reynolds' office shows conversation about additional victims at Whispering Pines. Elijah requesting to speak with you immediately. The investigation had reached its breaking point, from a bloody teenager on a suburban street to a trafficking network that reached far beyond their small town. And somewhere in that network was Sophia Blackwood, whose brother had orchestrated an elaborate plan not just for revenge, but for rescue. The pre-dawn raid on Whispering Pines summer camp unfolded like a military operation. State police tactical units, FBI human trafficking specialists, and medical teams converging through the misty forest. Detective Mercer, despite having been awake for nearly 48 hours, moved with focused determination. Beside her, secured in a bulletproof vest and special temporary consultant credentials, walked Elijah Blackwood, his presence a controversial but necessary element of the operation. "Remember our agreement," Mercer said quietly as they approached the main lodge. "You stay with me, follow every instruction, and this doesn't impact your case." Elijah nodded, his eyes scanning the collection of rustic cabins with the intensity of someone who had memorized every detail from photographs and testimony. "She's in Cedar Cabin," he said, with quiet certainty. "That's where they keep the high-value transfers." Inside the main lodge, the operation team found exactly what Maxwell's confession had described: computer systems tracking inventory, medical supplies for sedation, and documentation for international transfers disguised as student exchange programs. 2 staff members were apprehended attempting to flee through a back entrance. The true discovery came as tactical teams secured the surrounding cabins. 5 teenagers, 3 girls and 2 boys, were found in various states of sedation. Medical teams worked quickly to stabilize them, while officers documented the scene. In Cedar Cabin, just as Elijah had predicted, they found Sophia Blackwood and 2 other girls, their belongings packed for relocation scheduled for that very morning. The reunion between brother and sister occurred in the back of an ambulance, Sophia, still groggy from sedatives, reaching out with trembling hands to touch her brother's face, as if confirming he was real. "You found me," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "I promised I would," Elijah replied, his composed facade finally crumbling as he held his sister's hand. "No matter what." Later that afternoon, as the magnitude of the operation became clear, Detective Mercer sat in her office reviewing preliminary reports. The network extended to 7 states, with connections to international trafficking rings. The 3 men Elijah had captured represented just one acquisition cell in a much larger organization. Federal agencies were already pursuing leads based on evidence recovered from Whispering Pines. A knock at her door revealed Detective Hayes, holding a thick file. "DA's office just delivered their charging decision on the Blackwood case," he said, placing the file on her desk. "They're recommending leniency given the extraordinary circumstances and his cooperation leading to multiple rescues. And the victims? All alive, all reunited with families or in protective custody. Sophia's physical injuries will heal, but the psychological trauma—" He left the sentence unfinished. Mercer thought about justice, its rigid definitions in law books versus its messy reality in the world. "He broke the law," she said quietly. "But how many lives did he save in the process?" "That's for the courts to decide," Hayes replied. "But off the record, if it had been my sister, I might have done worse." The case concluded with a complexity that defied simple narratives. Pastor Reynolds, Principal Maxwell, and Sheriff Warren faced federal charges that would likely keep them imprisoned for decades. The teenagers rescued from Whispering Pines began the long process of healing and reintegration. The wider trafficking network was under international investigation, its operations disrupted but not yet fully dismantled. As for Elijah Blackwood, the courts ultimately sentenced him to 5 years probation and mandatory counseling, acknowledging both the severity of his actions and the extraordinary circumstances that drove them. His extensive evidence collection became a case study for law enforcement agencies, training to recognize signs of trafficking operations. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Detective Mercer met Elijah at a coffee shop near the high school, where he had recently returned to complete his senior year. Sophia sat beside him, her eyes clearer now but still carrying shadows of her ordeal. "There's been another case," Mercer said without preamble, sliding a file across the table. "3 teenagers missing in Lancaster County. Pattern matches what we saw here." Elijah's hand rested on the file, but didn't open it. "You think it's connected to the same network?" "We know it is. The question is how much deeper this goes." Sophia looked between them, understanding the unspoken conversation. "They're still out there, aren't they? The people at the top." Mercer nodded slowly. "Justice isn't always as complete as we'd like it to be." As she stood to leave, Elijah's voice stopped her. "Detective Mercer," he said, his eyes carrying the same intensity she'd first seen in the interrogation room. "When you find them, the ones giving the orders, what will you do?" The question hung between them. A challenge, a test, perhaps even a warning. "My job," she answered simply. "By the book, always." Elijah smiled then, a knowing expression that reminded her he had once taken a very different approach. "Of course," he said, tucking the file into his backpack. "That's the difference between us." As Mercer walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case, like the shadows that still haunted the rescued teenagers, was far from over. Sometimes justice wasn't an ending but a beginning, setting in motion consequences that would unfold for years to come. In the distance, church bells rang from First Light, now under new leadership. The town of Oak Ridge was healing, rebuilding trust in institutions that had betrayed them. But beneath the surface of renewed normalcy, a vigilance remained, in the extra security cameras at the high school, in the way parents kept closer watch on their children, and in the determined gaze of a teenager who had once taken justice into his own hands, and might, Mercer suspected, do so again if necessary.